Okay, this is academic hero number 6, Isaac Newton. And Isaac Newton lived from 1642 to 1727. He's considered by many people the smartest person who ever lived, the greatest scientist who ever lived. He had zero grant money, and again, that's one of the things I think that's great about him is he just did all this stuff on his own because he was curious about understanding the world, understanding the truth about different scientific issues like the law of gravity. Principia, Mathematical Explanation of Astronomy is one of the books that made him real famous. Alan Core's professor has a good DVD course on the Enlightenment history. He says Newton inspired the scientific community. He showed that the universe was knowable. He had taken things a much bigger step with his knowledge of calculus, astronomy, optics, mechanics. Daniel Robinson, who has a great course on the best of philosophy, he said Socrates is the saint of philosophy, Newton is the saint of science. Alexander Pope, the great poet of that time, said nature and nature's laws lay hid in the night. God said, let Newton be, and all was light. So his own story of growing up I thought was interesting because he was poor. His father died before he was born. His mother then married some rich guy who didn't want to be a stepfather, didn't want Isaac around. So his mother just abandoned her kid. She shipped him off to be raised by relatives. Then the relatives tried to make him a farmer. He was always daydreaming. He got whipped for that. He didn't fit in too well. He spent a lot of time alone reading and thinking. And by the way, I think for kids, it's good that they spend a lot of time alone reading and thinking. There's too much time being around other friends. And, you send the kid over to the friend's house, and then there's the older sibling who gets them into mischief. So it's good for kids to spend some time alone. Learn how to entertain themselves, how to read a book. Accept that that's part of life. It makes kids smarter. Okay, the next thing is he got a job in an apothecary, a pharmacy of that day, and he used that as an opportunity to learn chemistry and pharmacology. He made the most of his situations. Luckily, he had a relative who got him into college as a subsizer, basically to be a servant for the aristocrats of his time. So they were the lowest social order students of that time. But he got a formal education, which in that day was Aristotle, scholasticism, and astronomy, and he was fascinated by it. He wanted to learn, all the alchemy motivates people to learn chemistry and other science. His fascination with religion was tied in with his study of astronomy and magic. That all later was helpful to him. He did get a bachelor's degree from Trinity College, Oxford, and then there was a plague in England at that time in 1665, and this was his miracle year, Anno mirabilis. And during that year, he spent a lot of time just sitting around in his room thinking about the big questions of science. And he would ask himself, what pulls an apple to the ground? What pulls the moon to orbit around the Earth? And he would just obsess over these questions. He'd be reading, studying, and doing experiments to try to figure them out. And in his miracle year, in 1 year, he figured out the laws of gravity, the physics of mechanics, the principles of optics, and invented calculus. I mean, it's like the most incredible year of science ever in the history of the world. Okay, so Newton did not really become too famous until after he was sort of popularized by Voltaire. Voltaire is the French genius writer who was always getting into trouble for getting into arguments with aristocrats, and he was exiled for a year to England, and he wrote a book called Letters on English that made Newton very famous. He talked about the story about the apple falling and Newton recognizing gravity in that. And here's a quote by Voltaire. Who is the greatest man, Caesar, Alexander, or Cromwell? It was Newton, for he masters our minds by the force of truth that we owe him reverence, not to those who enslave us by violence. Okay, Isaac Newton was also a heretic in his day. He was obsessed with reading the Bible and studying religion, but he didn't agree with the basic principles of Protestantism in England at that time. He didn't believe in the complete unity of the Trinity, and he felt that the King James Bible had added more unity than there really was in the original. He thought God the Father is superior to the Son, etc. So anyways, he would have been fired and booted out of the university, but he had some friends who kind of protected him and softened up the rules, because you'd have to declare that you agreed with the Trinity or you'd be booted out. It's kind of like nowadays the religion of biology college schools is Darwinism. And if any professor doesn't agree with all the basic ideas of Darwinism, which, by the way, is bogus for origin of life and a lot of other things, it's good for diversity within a genus or the family group, and it has useful things, no doubt about it, but to think that it relates to the origin of life is just stupid. Okay, let's see what's next on Newton. So a couple quotes from Isaac Newton here. He says, "He who thinks half-heartedly will not believe in God, but he who really thinks has to believe in God." Isaac Newton. So the point I'm trying to make is in the modern world, there's this attitude, anybody who believes in God or religion is stupid, and that, atheism is what the cool smart crowd is. No, it's not true. Leibniz had said there's either God or nothingness, and nothingness is not that inspiring. So having this sense, you don't have to do religion to be a good scientist or anything, but what I'm trying to say is it's also the case that a lot of great creators and artists like Johann Sebastian Bach, best composer ever, he said, "Every composition I make it to the glory of God." Same thing with Michelangelo. I mean, it inspires a person sometimes, and a lot of people got sadness and difficulty in their life. So I'm just making the point, a lot of the greatest geniuses, most talented artists, scientists, composers that ever lived, this is how they think, okay? And, you can mock them all you want, but who could do what they could do? So that's one of the reasons why I studied all these. Read the biographies of the people in your field and what they've done and how they thought, and it'll inspire you. It sort of pulls you into having more ability to do stuff when you have this sense of destiny that these great achievers had. So here's a quote from Newton. All my discoveries have been made as an answer to prayer. Atheism is so senseless. When I look at the solar system, I see the Earth at the right distance from the sun to receive the proper amounts of heat and light. This did not happen by chance. Okay? The other reason why you'll sometimes see it is if a person lives in a country where religion is allowed, they can be inspired, they can go their own way. If Newton had lived in another country that was a typical dictatorship, he would just have been executed as a heretic, okay? Instead, he got to do all this scientific stuff. So you have to believe life is meaningful in order to want to put that much effort into your studying. And also, if you believe that humans have value intrinsically created in the image of God, then you're motivated to try to help them rather than saying they're just talking primates. Why not rip them off or make money off them any way you can? So the typical thing, too, about great scientists like Newton, and Albert Einstein was kind of like this as well. A student asked Newton, "How did you discover the law of gravity?" And Newton said, "By thinking about it all the time." All day long, day after day, year after year, he'd be obsessed about what causes gravity, and then he figured it out. Another quote by Newton, "If we could understand the cause of motion, we could understand the world." And that sounds a lot like Nikola Tesla, okay? And look at Nikola Tesla. Look at him, too. Another obsessive genius, thinking all the time in his own intellectual world. Let's see. Oh, and then, I was inspired by Newton. I read a couple of biographies about him. I thought he was amazing. He's much more idiosyncratic than was conveyed by this brief lecture here. But, for example, when there was the big announcement of the epidemic of COVID, I had 6 books in my head I wanted to write, and I knew I never would find the time, but I figured I have to write them this year because who knows what's going to happen, So I was working full time. I had little free time. I saw how Newton would create big blocks of time and didn't waste his time with anything tangential. So I heard a great quote. There's a YouTube channel called Inside the Score. It's about classical music, and the author of that YouTube channel, Inside the Score, he wanted to be a composer himself, and he is a composer. But he said this quote, "Resources are the enemy of creativity," unquote. And I read about Mozart. He composed all these symphonies when he was poverty-stricken and just near starving, and it was quite sad and difficult time phases in his life. So anyways, the point was, so what I did for an entire year, I said nothing social, 0, no wasted time, no non-academic surfing the internet, no email, no phone calls, nothing but writing. And I published 6 books in 1 year because I wanted to be like, I have a miracle year by Isaac Newton. Of course, my work is totally ignored. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of times is how you achieve stuff, just by totally narrowing your focus and just doing that one thing. And that's what I learned from the Schultz brothers, too. That's how they got great at wrestling, just focusing on wrestling. So anyways, hope it's helpful.